end when he said packed. Hope that everybody can see stuff. It's a deep topic for only 20 minutes, so I'm afraid I'll only be able to take questions in the end, but I hope that's fine. Otherwise, if you see me today anywhere, we're always happy to talk about this topic. So as Ole said, this is really about executing on attribution, so I hope that most of you know what attribution is. I'll do a short wrap-up in the beginning, what we understand of attribution. So there's this guy, Flo, from Philipp Werner, who basically brings it to the point when he says attribution is a way of assigning credit for how important each marketing touchpoint in the customer journey is to the ultimate conversion. So that's very academic. Thanks for that. What does this mean in real life? So what we want to do always is for each customer understand the customer journey. So this is different touch points as in clicks. Here you see that somebody had 3 touch points with us, did a first order for 100 euros, had some more touch points later on, did a second order that was worth 50 euros. If you get to this point, that's already cool because you have a customer journey for a single person. Not that easy, but if you have it, that's cool. Then what you can do with attribution is you can use the basic last click model, which basically says, okay, this 100 euro that we generated, we attribute it to the last click before the order. Very simple, it's also what you can find in Google Analytics. You do this with a second order, obviously the same. And there's another model which you can, basically you say it's linear, so we don't have a clue which one actually was responsible for the order, so we just distribute the value linearly across the touch points that we have. And then there's lots of more models that you can apply up to a level where it gets really interesting, which are the dynamic ones. Ole referred to them very briefly in the beginning. This is oftentimes where we see that people lose themselves in the beauty of playing around with models, but not so much thinking about what you can do with it in the end. So today I don't want to discuss these models with you. Happy to do that any other time. Today we want to look at why is this important, what can we do with it. So why should you bother thinking about attribution anyways? There's 2 main reasons I'd say. That without attribution, you don't really have a realistic view on the performance of marketing. The first one is, if you don't have it, then you run the risk of whitewashing your CPOs. What do I mean by that? You will probably be counting conversions multiple times in the different operational systems that you use, so AdWords, Bing, and so on. Let me give you an example. So if we take the customer journey that we've seen before, and only the first part to make it easy, we had these 3 touch points, we had 1 order of 100 euros. If you don't have attribution, it's very likely that you look into, let's say, Facebook for display, Criteria for retargeting, and AdWords for SEA. And they were all part of this customer journey that generated 1 order, and they will all say, it was us. So that's our order. So if you add them, you risk of running into the problem that you have 3 orders, but in your backend you only have 1. That's the first reason you need attribution, because you will have more orders than you actually had, and your CPOs will look great. So even if you go with last click, I'm already happy, because then you have 1 order in the backend, and you find any way, in this case last click, of attributing this order to the touch points that you have. So if you have last click, that's already something. You can go with linear, you do the same thing, but always you have this 1 order that you know from the backend that you attribute to some marketing channels. And once again, I don't care about the model so much today. Let's rather look at what we do with it. Second reason you need attribution is without it, it becomes really hard to scale to the upper funnel. So what do I mean by this? Most of you, I guess, know the marketing funnel, so awareness, and then you create interest in the product, then at some point there's a purchase decision, and then the action of the actual purchase, and hopefully also repurchase. We call this the upper funnel, where you generate the awareness, and the lower funnel is where it comes to the action. So we will take this customer journey again, we look at it. Usually display touchpoints, for example, there, or in this case it was a display touchpoint, they created the first awareness for this product. And there was some retargeting going on, so we maintained the interest of that person in the product, and later on the purchase decision was done with an SEA touchpoint. So if you have a last click model, it's going to be probably hard to scale to this upper funnel because the credit always goes to the last touch point, which is usually some direct, some SEO or SEA. So it makes sense to go beyond attribution, beyond last click attribution with any of these other models because you can give credit to touch points that were earlier on in the customer journey. Again, if you don't have this, it's going to be hard to scale to channels that are more on the upper funnel level. So display will be really hard for you if you're going with last click in the long run. All right, so if you got this, then you might wonder who's actually doing this out there. So there's lots of studies you can look at. I took a random one, and it's cool to see that 30% of these companies that were asked in this study by e-consultancy, they say, we have an attribution model. And it's also cool to see that there's another 56% that say, we don't have one yet, but we understood that we need one. When you dive deeper, and you ask, okay, what is actually keeping you from making something out of this attribution model? So the other way would be asking, what do you do with it? Or what keeps you from doing something with it? There's some reasons that we think we would have under control. So disparate tech platforms, okay, we could probably deal with that. Complexity of data, I think we also can deal with that. But actually the insights we get is also what Ole referred to in the beginning, what we see sometimes when talking to companies. Here it's only almost 40%. I'd argue it's a lot more. So when I talk to people, we often talk about this. So I think there's more people having trouble with actioning on the insights. What we then did, we talked to companies that we thought they had it all figured out. Because there's lots of digital winners that have a lot of experience in attribution, and we wanted to understand how do you action on the insights that you generate. And it was really interesting to see that they all said, well, we figured it out at some point, but we agree that it's super complicated. So one step back, what is it that we actually want to do with this attribution? So far we understood why we need one, but what are the actions that we want to take? First one is, we want to be in a position to better allocate our marketing budget, right? So we want to understand this SEA channel, for example, is probably not as good as we thought. Display might be better than we expected, so we can shift our budget. The second is that we want to derive targets, either for our internal marketing team or for the agencies, for them to steer the channel on a daily basis. So two main reasons why we want this. Doesn't sound too hard, right? Well, I think it is. There's two main reasons why this gets complicated very quickly. First one is the inherent imperfection of attribution. And that's also, I think, the reason why people like to play around with it so much, because they think they can crack it to 100%, and I don't think that's possible. So let's drill this further down. What are the main reasons that are complicated or that generate this inherent complexity? I mean, data integration marketing is constantly trying new partners. And if you want these partners or their touch points to be part of your customer journey, you need to integrate with them. You need to get the cost from the API, and so on and so forth. So there's a constant hassle of getting new data sources in. Then you have the whole offline world. As you remember, our customer journey is click-based, so you have a lot of touch points that happen offline that don't have a click. There's ways to integrate them, but it's always imperfect and it's a hassle. And you have indirect advertising effects. So the classic display problem. Display is generating a lot of impressions that probably not result in a click. So they will always say, this attribution model of yours is click-based. We don't feel that it doesn't really cover what we're doing. So you can go down the route and start implementing like impression-based attribution. Also a big topic, quite the hassle. And then you have cross-device effects. So this is easily solvable if you have a user login on your website. But let's say you're selling lamps, like Lampenwelt, and you don't want the user to log in, you just want to sell to guests also. It's really hard to combine these two customer journeys to one. So it can be that somebody sees a display ad on their mobile phone, they don't even click it, and then they later on they order from desktop by just coming in through SEO. It's a very common problem. What I want to say is that all of this is true, it's complex, and we have to keep working on it, but it shouldn't prevent us from using attribution for anything. So let's be a bit pragmatic here and say, this is something we have to deal with, and we have to accept that there is an inherent imperfection to this. The second main reason that makes it difficult is the more interesting one, I think, which is the discrepancies to operational systems. By operational systems, I mean the interfaces of the partners. So on AdWords, or Bing, or DoubleClick, or Facebook. Because if you think about it, what we do is we have this attribution model running somewhere. It could be a data warehouse, could also be Google Analytics. Bless you. We see costs in there, we see number of orders, everything you're interested in. And by definition, we have non-attributed data somewhere else, like AdWords in this example, or any other of these operational systems. So what's cool is that cost will be the same, because we only attribute revenues and orders, right? Which means that all these other metrics, they will be different, which is part of why we do attribution, right? So you see number of orders in AdWords, and it's very likely that they're not the number of orders that you see in your data warehouse, because we attributed the orders that we actually had across different channels. And AdWords always says we have the full one, right? So you have the problem that you have two different realities, really, which is hard for a marketer to live with. So what can you do about this? This is really the execution gap, I think, when it comes to attribution. First one is what I call diligent exploration. It's the ideal solution. So basically, you have the data warehouse or Google Analytics, where you have your attributed reality, and you can push that to all these operational systems. So that you have the attributed data also in AdWords, in Bing, in Facebook, and so on and so forth. So that the marketer really only has this one attributed reality that he can work with. Very idealistic, very hard to do. Because most of these partners, they don't really do this. So it's hard to, for example, push data back, attributed data back to Facebook directly. You can solve this if you go through Smartly or through some other bid management tools and so on. So the upside is, you have this one attributed reality, perfect world. And the marketers also can stay in the interfaces that they used to. So if you ask an SEA manager to switch away from AdWords and steal the campaigns from somewhere else, probably they won't like this so much. In this scenario, you don't have to. But the downsides are also quite big, I think. You need to integrate with all of these tools backwards. So you integrate with them anyways already to get the data into the data warehouse, but now you need to push data back. And as said, with a lot of partners, this is not even possible. So you can spend a lot of time creating this ideal solution, but once again, I think in order to be pragmatic, let's think about alternatives. The second one, and I think this is also the Flixbus approach of things, is granular interfaces. So the idea being, you have the marketeer working in the data warehouse on attributed data. So here, let's take any random metric that is affected by attribution. Let's take return on ad spend. And they can see this on the account level, on the cluster level, ad group, keyword, and so on. So really in any granularity, they can play around in the data warehouse, which is nice. And then the marketer switches to the operational system, so AdWords. He ignores the data that he sees there, and basically does only the action, which is, for example, the bid adjustments in AdWords. So here we're already asking quite a bit of a marketeer. We ask them to ignore what he sees in AdWords and just look, so basically switch around between the two interfaces. Just look at everything they have in data warehouse, make the decision what they want to do here, and then just perform the action in AdWords. What's good about this? We minimize the switching cost. So for starters, we have switching costs here as compared to the model before, but it's minimal, right? Now I can't do anything anymore, really. Do I have a little helper somewhere? Or maybe a slide before also.
Yeah, we have just
Or I can continue like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what I want to end this slide with is the downsides of this approach, which is it's also quite resource heavy to build this granular interface in your data warehouse. Not all channels work the same way. So for every channel manager, you need to build this granular interface for them to be able to drill down to keyword level or ad level. And basically you're rebuilding an AdWords interface or a Facebook Power Editor interface or whatever. So it's probably not your core competence and it's resource intensive. Already said before that the marketer has to actively ignore what they see in the tool that they're used to. So there's lots of cultural change involved here. And this is actually really complicated in a setup where you don't have the marketers in-house, but you're working with agencies. So you need to explain to, let's say, 7+ agencies that they are supposed to ignore everything they see in AdWords, where they're working with for all the other clients, and that they just need to act on something that you also have to give them in a way. So either you give them access to your data warehouse, or you schedule reports for them to receive regularly. So also not super easy. The third one is one I really like, which I call Inception. Now that the animation is not working, this is harder to understand, but I'll run you through it anyways. So you have an agency, they're working in AdWords, they're working on non-attributed ROAS, non-attributed KPIs. At the same time, you have your CMO and his team or her team working in the data warehouse on attributed data. So once again, there is a delta. And then the CMO basically, in his reality, comes up with a target ROAS that he wants to give to the agency. If he gave this attributed target ROAS to the agency would be puzzled and wouldn't know what to do because they live in a non-attributed world, right? So what you can do is you can calculate this target ROAS back to the non-attributed world and give this to the agency. The beauty of this is that the agency, or it could be an internal marketer, is working on attributed data without knowing it. So if you get to that point, that's also really cool, because if you have these 7+ agencies, no need to explain to them what your attribution model is, how they should work with it, and so on. You basically just give them another target, which will differ when you switch from not using attribution to using attribution. It will be a big switch in terms of the limits that you give them, but they will be able to work with it without knowing it. What's cool about this? No explanation. They work in the interfaces that they know and so on, already said. The downside is this little attribution factor here is not straightforward, obviously. And it's really only possible if you have enough data. So if you start to work with a new channel, then it's really, really hard to do this. If you have channels where you're constantly varying spend and so on, it's also not easy to do, but there are solutions to this. And there's another downside, which is that probably the whole marketing team, I think in the most situations, only the CMO or the person steering these agencies needs to understand this to 100%, needs to be able to live in both worlds. Because on the one hand, with their marketing team, they will be talking in their regular weekly meetings about attributed data. And when steering the agencies, they will have to switch their mind and talk to them about a different ROAS. So it's not straightforward because it has some complexity. So this sounds like a whole lot of work, and it is. But when we started this path into attribution, nobody said that this was going to be easy, right? I mean, already it's conceptually challenging to work with all these attribution models. But why not think as much about how to act on this? And this is what I want to encourage you to do. So no, it's not easy, but there are different solutions, and we are super curious to also discuss with you which ones you are going for. Thank you so much. So I think we do have 5 minutes for questions. Please feel free to shoot.
Well, thanks for the presentation. It was nice. I don't want to make it complicated, but in e-commerce especially, not only the purchase is your final goal or action. So for me, if you subscribe to my newsletters, I know exactly the rate of the conversion rates. Or if you registered yourself as a customer and not stay as an anonymous customer to me, I know how much money I can generate from you. So do you suggest, as marketers, to separate our budgets for advertisement or for adverts for different actions based on the attribution model, like newsletter subscription attribution model or purchase attribution model?
Good question. So I'm not the marketeer to steer this. We never implement an attribution model only for micro conversions such as newsletter registration, but theoretically you could. The second case you're referring to, which is customer lifetime value, right? So thinking beyond that first purchase, is something that we attribute also. It's also a very interesting challenge to think about how do you attribute this customer lifetime value across the different touch points, because
it's an upper funnel.
Not straightforward,
button steps.
But this is something I would urge you to do, yes, of course. Micro conversions is an interesting one, I have to think a bit about it. Never really did that. But I think marketing usually, correct me if I'm wrong here, usually they go for different conversion goals. So, I mean, there is prospecting as a goal, like newsletter signups, then there is first conversion as a goal, and there's also lots of CRM going on who basically try to generate the next order. So in general, I think this makes a lot of sense.
So thank you a lot. The one question that I really think about at the moment is this whole upper funnel stuff, because a problem that I encounter is with mobile traffic. I have ad formats like mobile interstitials that totally mess up my attribution metrics because they have click-through rates like 10-12% because you have so many accidental click rates or accidental clicks in the model suddenly. What's kind of the current perception on how to fix this? Because if I take like even like I don't know, U-shape or whatever model, how do you account for different click quality in different stages in these attribution models?
We don't. It's a good question. I mean, you can if you have algorithmic attribution and dynamic attribution. And that's also, now we're getting a bit into the model discussion that I didn't want to have, but
you can also stop.
But we can talk about it later. I think in general, there are ways to deal with this when you have like statistical models going on. All the others, it's anyways assumption based. So you can, for example, say, okay, if the traffic is coming from that source, then I'll treat it differently, and there's a negative factor for this. So, but it's always just assumptions, right? But that's what attribution is about to a certain degree. So, I think you can deal with this, but either with a complex model or with rules. Yeah.
Do you have the feeling that there's a minimum monthly budget that is required in order to get to that level of complexity? And if so, which one?
I would actually say this is for the CMO to decide, because at some point this, like not having attribution, I think that's something you can solve quite quickly without having to have a big budget. You can even go with Google and then mess around with this a bit. But at some point, if the marketer or the CMO decides to move to the upper funnel, I think it's for him to tell us when we should come in and help. I can't pin a budget to this.
You must have that feeling about it.
Also, the guys from Project A, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even portfolio companies that are quite early, but that spend, I don't know, probably 200K per month, we start thinking about this. But this is really, I don't really know.
So maybe last question from the audience?
If there is one. Yeah.
So you were talking about the offline channels. How do you bring them in? So it's a really interesting question for me. We try different things. For example, we redirect by URL, but it's not really working because customers reuse the specific URL and so on.
Yeah. We don't do that so much because we don't have a lot of portfolio companies scaling offline. But I think like there's like classical ways of, as you mentioned, you can use voucher codes, QR codes. I don't think that's going to work. You can use certain landing pages. I don't think that's working very well either anymore. You can also have phone numbers. Certain phone numbers, depends on your business model. that you can then integrate. Yeah, it's one of the challenges that I referred to earlier. I think it's something that there will also be stuff happening in the future, but what I urge everybody to do is that if you have attribution, accept that it's imperfect and think about how to do anything with it really. Because I feel that we are also guessing from the questions where it's very much focused on how can we make this model better and not so much on how can we ensure that the marketing department is actually able to do something with it. That's really the message that I wanted to bring across.
Thank you so much.